For most people, many of the anti-natalist conclusions seem brutal. They are emotionally heavy, dark, and difficult to process. For example, take the following common conclusions of the philosophy. Creating sentient beings causes suffering where none was there before. Having children is therefore immoral, so everyone who has had children has done a great wrong, whether they realize it or not. Parents are ultimately responsible for the death of their offspring, since, had the children not been brought into existence, they would not have had to endure their eventual inevitable death. If everyone abstained from committing the immorality of procreation, humans would go extinct. Even though ethical antinatalism is based on solid principles like prevention of suffering and respect for autonomy and consent, the truth is, if you're not ready to handle the logical conclusions of antinatalism, they can be emotionally destabilizing. If you take antinatalism seriously, it could put into question your whole worldview, depending on what it was founded on to begin with. I've had very emotional conversations on antinatalism, and I wanted to make space for the toll this topic can take on people, both antinatalists and non-antinatalists. As antinatalists, not only do we have to deal with the conclusions I just mentioned, but we also have to deal with the fact that most people in the world do not agree with us. To be clear, none of this makes the philosophy any less true, but it does mean that we carry a sort of burden. I think of this burden a bit like I think about facing my own mortality. It's there, it's undeniable, but with time you get used to it. And eventually it may even become an odd source of comfort. Non-antinatalists may be battling with the burden of facing mortality, and antinatalism simply reminds them of this. I once heard someone say, when arguing against antinatalism, I have no interest in believing in something so horrible when I can believe in something wonderful. And later saying, I'll take suffering if it means humans have a future. I understand where they're coming from. It's hard to come to terms with the fact that humans will not be around forever. And if your source of hope is in humans continuing to exist indefinitely, it's hard to step back and think about the cost entailed in delaying the unavoidable extinction of humanity, the suffering of billions of people that ultimately will not prevent the inevitable. Because it is in the presumably far future, it seems too abstract. But the truth is, it will be just as real as the suffering of currently existing people if we decide to contribute to this cycle. This person's response made me think about whether the potential gloominess that antinatalism can cause is an effective argument against it. After all, some people might not be able to handle the existential crisis the philosophy might cause. If the thought of antinatalism increases suffering for that person sufficiently, maybe this is a reason not to expose this person to the philosophy. However, this only makes sense if the person does not procreate. In other words, one can believe the antinatalist position to be wrong in order to feel better about life, but ethically it only is acceptable if in the end one doesn't in turn cause more suffering by reproducing. Despite the potential gloominess of the philosophy, antinatalists can still enjoy the pleasant things in life. After all, the goal of minimizing suffering includes minimizing our own suffering. And I do think it's possible to both hold antinatalism to be an ethical way of making decisions, while at the same time enjoy things even if they are immersed in a pro-natalist world. Nihilism doesn't seem pragmatically useful either. Even if one believes in a globally meaningless universe, there is still meaning locally because joy matters to the individual, just like suffering matters to the individual. For the already existing person, a few moments of joy are still of value. Another thing to realize when faced with the gloominess of a philosophy is that its realism has a lot of merit. Anti-nihilists know the end is inevitable, whether talking about our personal death or the eventual extinction of humans. So instead of pretending death and suffering don't exist or can't be prevented in the future, we decide to actually take the ethical route and not perpetuate suffering to future generations. That is an amazing accomplishment to be proud of, even if we just do it at a personal level. And just maybe, knowing this can bring comfort, even if everything else around us goes badly. Thanks for listening.